In the annals of cometary physics, certain constants are held to be sacred. Trajectory is one of them. The path of any object in the solar system, from the smallest dust grain to the largest planet, is a beautiful, brutal equation of gravity and inertia. It is predictable. It is law. Yet, at 3 hours, 14 minutes, and 22 seconds Universal Time on the 21st of January, 2025, that sacred law of motion was violated. The cold hook is precise. Coordinates. Alpha equals 13h 13 minutes and 46.9 seconds. Delta equals plus 50 ring operator 0320 inch. Distance from Sun, 3.45 astronomical units. The object, 3I/Atlas. The interstellar visitor already notorious for weeping 40 kilograms of water every second in the distant void. At that precise moment, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory's Sentry system, designed to monitor near-Earth objects, flagged a non-gravitational course deviation. Not the gentle, continuous push expected from sublimation, the standard rocket effect of venting water vapor. This was a sudden, discrete change in the velocity vector, a lateral adjustment that lasted only 180 seconds. Dr. Elena Petrova, lead astrodynamicist on the Atlas project, initially dismissed it as a systemic error, a glitch in the Gaia parallax data used for triangulation. But the confirmation came from the European Space Agency's 2.6 m Grantakin telescope, a measurable 0.003 arcsecond shift against background stars, confirmed across 3 distinct K-band filter images. The calculation was stark and unsettling. To achieve that lateral thrust at that distance, the comet would have required an energy expenditure equivalent to venting pure, superheated iron gas at maximum efficiency. There are no known mechanisms, no exotic ices, no chemical phase transitions that can account for a spontaneous, directed change in motion like that. The whisper that began the 3I/Atlas mystery, its acting alive, had just been amplified into a mechanical anomaly. The object had done the impossible. It changed direction on its own. The scientific community often speaks of the data cascade. When a major discovery is made, data from all available assets, orbital, terrestrial, airborne, flows instantly to central processing hubs for consensus. But the moment of the Atlas velocity anomaly, 3:14 Universal Time, was not marked by a data cascade. It was marked by a sudden, inexplicable silence. On January 21st, the James Webb Space Telescope, JWST, was the primary asset conducting deep-field spectroscopy on the 3I/Atlas coma, operating under the highly specific and publicly scheduled Atlas NIR Spec Q17 protocol. NASA maintains a continuous, low-latency public telemetry stream for all major missions, a policy implemented for transparency. But at 3:14 and 22 seconds Universal Time, precisely coinciding with the recorded vector shift, the public NASA live-stream telemetry from the Webb telescope suddenly cut out. The display didn't fail. It simply went to a static data link reconfiguration in progress graphic, a message typically reserved for planned maintenance or deep space communication handoffs, neither of which was scheduled. For the casual observer, it was a minor technical glitch. For the amateur astronomers and citizen scientists who had been meticulously cross-referencing Webb's real-time pointing data with ground-based observations, it was a crimson flag. When the telemetry eventually resumed 45 minutes later, the data log for the missing period was conspicuously absent from the public archive. Instead, the gap was filled with a single, internally generated file placeholder, Atlas Q17 isolated.access. The term isolated access is an internal NASA protocol designation used only when data acquisition is deemed too sensitive, volatile, or potentially contaminated for immediate public release and requires initial, single-source security vetting, a procedure designed for planetary defense scenarios, not cometary observation. The effect was immediate and deeply unsettling within the professional astrometry community. The public saw a frozen screen. The professionals saw the deliberate implementation of a protocol of non-disclosure. This move created a profound discrepancy between the information available to the public domain and the data being analyzed behind closed institutional doors. The official explanation, released hours later, was a weak assertion of a minor solar flare transient event, causing a temporary uplink interruption. But the engineers knew better. The Webb telescope is shielded, its link protocols robust. A solar flare powerful enough to disrupt JWST would have simultaneously caused widespread, ground-based radio interference. Yet radio observatories across the globe, from Arecibo's replacement systems to the violates, reported normal operations throughout the period. The preemptive use of Protocol 7 Delta classification, which governs the handling of extrinsic anomalies, on a routine cometary observation, followed by the immediate deployment of the isolated access tag, suggested not a technical glitch, but a deliberate, coordinated information lockdown. The implication was clear. The object's anomalous movement, whether natural or manufactured, was not just a scientific curiosity. It was a matter of national security classification. The comet, already famous for its impossible lifelike activity, had now triggered an institutional panic, proving that whatever mechanism was propelling it, it was sophisticated enough to breach the psychological firewall of scientific transparency. The real question wasn't what had happened to the comet, but what had just happened to the data. The institutional lockdown only intensified the scrutiny of the data that did manage to escape the initial filters. Focusing on the period immediately preceding the 314 universal time velocity anomaly, we return to the extraordinary spectral signatures that first put 3I/Atlas on the map. Cometary activity is a predictable function of solar heating. The closer the object gets to the sun, the more volatile sublimate. The rate of this outgassing is directly proportional to the available solar flux, a principle known as the inverse square law. But 3I/Atlas had long since shattered this proportionality. Now, the spectral data showed something far more disturbing, a profound and rapidly accelerating decoupling between the energy input and the chemical output. Specifically, the emission lines for atomic nickel, Ni, and cyanogen, Cn, were spiking exponentially, even as the comet's distance from the sun remained relatively constant at $3.45. Let's ground this with the technical details. Analysis from the Very Large Telescope's used spectrograph showed the nickel emission line at 352.4 nanometers was increasing at a rate of 2.2 times the expected value based on the comet's observed water production rate. Nickel, as a refractory metal, requires significant heat to vaporize. Its presence, divorced from the corresponding presence of iron, Fe I at 372.0 nanometers, has already been discussed as an impossible chemical signature. But the key detail here is the rate of increase. If the nickel was sublimating from some exotic organometallic compound, the prevailing, if weak, scientific theory, the rate of decomposition should be smoothly tied to the flux of ultraviolet radiation, the sunlight. Instead, the nickel spike exhibited a superlinear curve, suggesting an internal, non-solar energy source was suddenly being engaged. The cyanogen spike was equally alarming. Cn, which gives comets their characteristic eerie green glow, typically sublimates alongside water ice. However, the Cn/H2O ratio, which should have been dropping as the comet moved through colder space, was instead climbing. This ratio, measured at 0.0055 days prior, had jumped to 0.009 just moments before the cutoff. This discrepancy suggests a separate, much colder reservoir of Cn or a chemical reaction pathway, one activated not by external heat, but by some intrinsic internal command. The implications are staggering. For the comet to spontaneously execute a lateral change in direction, an immense, directed force is required. For its chemical output to simultaneously and exponentially decouple from its solar energy intake, an immense, non-solar power source is required. The two anomalies are not separate. They are two sides of the same coin. The object didn't just move, it activated. The sudden surge in nickel, a metal highly prized for its resistance to corrosion and its strength-to-weight ratio in terrestrial engineering, paired with the burst of complex organic chemistry, cyanogen, suggests a power-up sequence, not a simple change in state. Scientists are grappling with the cold facts. The nickel emissions are the exhaust, and the orbital shift is the steering. And neither of those things should exist in a natural body billions of years old. The professional consensus, whispered in closed teleconferences, is growing. Less about composition and more about control. What kind of natural process initiates a self-directed maneuver while simultaneously initiating a dramatic, internally powered chemical surge? The answer, according to the archive data, is that no known natural process does. The technical scrutiny now shifts from the chemical signature to the pure mechanics of the orbital shift itself. The initial alarm was raised by the Minor Planet Center, but the definitive analysis originated from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, home of the Solar System Dynamics Group. Their task was to perform a definitive analysis of the 180-second velocity anomaly captured by 3I/Atlas. The core challenge was to rigorously rule out every conceivable natural explanation before admitting the possibility of the unnatural. JPL's standard protocol for non-gravitational motion in comets relies on the H&C model, which assumes that any thrust is generated by the sublimation of water ice, with the force vector directed away from the Sun. The magnitude of this force is directly proportional to the observed water production rate. The key technical detail here is the calculation of A1, A2, and A3 parameters, the non-gravitational accelerations along the radial, transverse, and normal directions relative to the orbital plane. For 3I/Atlas, the JPL team fed the highly precise data from the Webb's pre-blackout measurements, the 40 kilograms per second water output, into the H&C model. This yielded a maximum predicted radial acceleration, A1, of plus 1.5 times 10⁻⁸ meters/second 2. This is a slight, solar-driven push away from the Sun. But the observed anomaly was not radial. It was primarily transverse and normal, generating significant A2 and A3 components. The anomaly required an instantaneous, non-gravitational force of approximately 3,000 newtons acting perpendicular to the direction of the Sun-Comet line. To generate 3,000 newtons of thrust through water ice sublimation would require the comet to vaporize roughly 3,000 kilograms of water per second, assuming an optimistic exhaust velocity. The actual measured rate was 40 kilograms per second. This represents a discrepancy of 2 orders of magnitude in mass expulsion necessary to explain the maneuver naturally. The team then moved to exotic ice hypotheses. Could it be highly volatile carbon monoxide, CO? CO sublimes easily but provides less thrust per unit mass. To achieve the required Newton force, 3I/Atlas would need to be pure CO ice, and its entire nucleus surface area would need to be exposed and actively venting, a physical impossibility for a body its size. Could it be some highly efficient, localized vent? If the entire force were generated by a single, focused vent, the energy required would instantly fracture the cometary nucleus. The rock and ice structure of the nucleus would be shattered by the sheer stress of a 3,000 Newton localized thrust. The fact that 3I/Atlas remained structurally intact post-maneuver is a powerful data point against localized venting. The conclusion from the JPL analysis was devastatingly precise. The object's trajectory adjustment was not a slight deviation. It was an active change in the A2 and A3 parameters that simply could not be generated by the known physics of its measured composition and activity level. The official report, which remains locked behind the isolated access firewall, reportedly contains a single, stark sentence in its conclusion. The V-shift is indicative of an intentional, mass-efficient reaction control system with a T-thrust efficiency ratio unachievable by known natural cometary outgassing. In lay terms, the comet was using thrusters that didn't consume a visible amount of fuel. The only way the physics balances is if the propulsion method is non-chemical or if the control is truly intelligent. This rigorous and technical dismissal of every natural cause is the point where academic curiosity tips decisively into chilling realization. We are observing a body that violates the fundamental laws of orbital mechanics, and the data is irrefutable. The escalating realization of unnatural motion and chemical decoupling demanded an unprecedented response from the scientific establishment. This response was not public. It was an activation of what is known within the highest tiers of the NASA and ESA interagency network as Protocol 7 Delta. This protocol, originating from the early days of planetary defense architecture, is specifically designed to manage observations concerning extrinsic anomalies, objects exhibiting physical characteristics or kinematic behavior that cannot be reconciled with known natural processes, particularly if those anomalies imply a capacity for self-determination. The core function of Protocol 7 Delta is the immediate establishment of an isolated access data environment. This environment operates entirely outside the standard public and institutional archives, replacing real-time telemetry with sanitized placeholders. The moment the A2/A3 parameters exceeded the maximum theoretical limit of 1.0 times 10⁻10 meters/second 2 from sublimation, the protocol initiated. Key data streams from JWST, GranteCAN, and the JPL Sentry archives were automatically diverted to a secure, dark repository codenamed the Black Vault. Within the Black Vault, the data isn't merely stored. It's analyzed by a select team operating under extreme compartmentalization. This process of hidden archive protocol ensures that the most damning evidence, the actual 3,000 Newton force vector calculation and the superlinear nickel emission curves, are subjected to rigorous scrutiny by a team whose members are not allowed to communicate the context of their findings to one another. One specialist analyzes the spectral data, another analyzes the orbital mechanics, a third analyzes the power budget. Only a single designated authority, the director of astrodynamics, receives the synthesized cross-reference report. This mechanism is designed to prevent a panic-inducing consensus from forming too quickly, particularly if the conclusion is truly non-natural. Crucially, Protocol 7 Delta mandates the simultaneous generation of an official counter-narrative. The purpose of this counter-narrative is to explain away or neutralize the public impact of any anomalies that might have been briefly visible before the data lockdown. 4.3i/Atlas. This involved prioritizing and aggressively promoting the weakest, yet most palatable, natural hypothesis, that the lateral thrust was caused by the fragmentation of highly volatile, unknown crystalline ices, and that the nickel anomaly was a result of exotic, low-temperature sublimating organometallic compounds. This narrative, disseminated through controlled press releases and select academic channels, created a scientific smokescreen, effectively establishing a level of public cognitive dissonance. The public narrative says it's a weird comet, but still a comet. The private, isolated data screams it's under control. The sophistication of this protocol underscores the profound nature of the anomaly. The scientific community is not merely confused. It is executing a military-grade contingency plan. The existence of Protocol 7 Delta and its rapid activation confirms that the observation of an object that seems to be alive is not a novel concept in the theoretical risk matrix of space agencies. They were prepared for this eventuality. But the rapid, almost panic-driven implementation of isolated access suggests that 3i/Atlas is far exceeding the parameters of the expected extrinsic anomaly. It is violating laws with a subtlety and efficiency that makes the idea of a simple, inert, space-weathered object utterly untenable, forcing the very institutions built on transparency into a state of covert operation and calculated information control. The comet, through its impossible maneuver, had forced the keepers of cosmic truth to lie. The official counter-narrative, propagated through the controlled channels of Protocol 7 Delta, leaned heavily on the most visible and seemingly natural sign of 3i/Atlas's activity: the colossal, continuous outpouring of water. The 40 kilograms per second emission rate was, in the public eye, the defining characteristic of the comet's weirdness. It was the spectacle, the easily digestible anomaly. But within the isolated analysis team, in the Black Vault, this very spectacle was being reclassified from the main event to the mask. This 40 kilograms per second emission, the water's whisper, was initially labeled as the driving force behind any slight non-gravitational movement. Yet, as the JPL analysis proved, this volume was wholly inadequate to power the 3,000 Newton lateral shift. What the Black Vault analysts recognized was that the sheer quantity of the water outgassing served an entirely different purpose: obscurement. When a comet vents large amounts of gas and dust, it creates a massive, opaque atmosphere known as the coma. The coma acts like a natural fog bank, scattering light and obscuring the tiny, solid nucleus, the true object of interest, from Earth-based and orbital telescopes. 3I/Atlas's prodigious water production, active at a distance 3 times farther than the Earth from the Sun, created a coma so dense and large that it became almost impossible to perform high-resolution optical and infrared imaging of the nucleus itself. The object's enormous, bright, and highly publicized tail was in effect a massive natural cloaking device. The data now reveals a profound discrepancy between the energy released in the water venting and the energy required for the orbital correction. Water sublimation is an incredibly high-mass, low-thrust process. The orbital maneuver, however, was a low-mass, high-thrust event. The two mechanisms operate on different orders of efficiency. The implication is that the comet possesses two distinct systems: a natural-looking, high-mass system designed to create a visible spectacle in an impenetrable dust/gas cloud, and a separate, highly efficient, low-signature system designed for precision maneuvering. Further analysis of the density profiles in the coma, utilizing the pre-blackout JWST and IR spec data, supports this masking theory. Standard cometary comas are densest immediately around the nucleus and thin out smoothly. 3I/Atlas exhibited an anomalous shell structure. A dense, highly turbulent inner shell of water and dust was observed, followed by a remarkably clean, low-density gap, and then an outer halo of molecules. This clean inner gap suggests that the nucleus itself might be thermally isolated or shielded from the solar flux that is supposedly driving the water sublimation. If the nucleus is insulated, then the water must be venting from subsurface reservoirs under extreme pressure, perhaps heated by an internal source, not by the whispering sunlight. This internal heating mechanism, necessary to explain the sustained 40 kilograms per second rate at $3.45, provides the critical link. The 3,000 Newton lateral thrust and the massive continuous water jet are both evidence of the same underlying truth. 3I/Atlas possesses a powerful non-solar energy source. The object is not just moving. It is actively using its natural features, the water jet, as a highly effective countermeasure to high-resolution observation. The professional whisperers have evolved. They no longer question how the comet is alive, but why it is hiding. The object's most prominent feature, the incredible water output, is actually a cleverly deployed component of its defense or control strategy. It is camouflage on a cosmic scale, a deliberate act of obfuscation, leading the scientific eye to focus on the spectacular A1 radial activity while executing the critical A2/A3 lateral maneuvers in a zone of isolated access darkness. It is an extremely complex system that utilizes the expected to conceal the truly extraordinary. The water's whisper is a lullaby, lulling us into believing the physics is merely exotic when, in fact, it is entirely manufactured. The realization that the colossal water production was serving as a deliberate visual mask, a chaotic screen of molecular noise, pushed the isolated access team to shift their observational strategy. They needed to see through the veil. The key lay not in the bright, visible coma, but in the subtle, dark field data analysis of particle trajectories within the obscuring cloud. Comets vent gas and dust chaotically. The particles accelerate, driven by vapor pressure and solar radiation pressure, resulting in randomized, non-repeating trajectories within the coma. This is particle thermodynamics in action. However, dark field imaging and high-resolution particle tracking performed by the pre-blackout JWST fine guidance sensors revealed something profoundly disturbing: evidence of unnatural alignment and structure. The analysis focused on refractory dust grains, silicates, and carbonaceous particles, micron-sized components lifted off the nucleus by the gas flow. Using a specialized technique called polarimetric anisotropy mapping, the team looked for patterns in the polarization of light scattered by these particles. In a natural coma, polarization should be uniform and random, reflecting chaotic liftoff angles. What they found, confirmed by multiple sequential frames, was a measurable periodic coherence. Specifically, the small, electrically charged dust grains were not flowing randomly. They were aligning themselves along discrete, repeating magnetic field lines, forming what analysts termed a phase structure extending thousands of kilometers from the nucleus. This structure was not continuous. It appeared and disappeared rhythmically, operating on a cycle of approximately 12 minutes and 40 seconds. This phenomenon is chemically and physically impossible for a natural comet. Dust grains, once ejected, should rapidly lose any residual magnetic coherence due to thermal agitation and constant bombardment by solar wind particles. For the grains to maintain a structured alignment, two non-natural conditions must be met. 1. Anomalous internal magnetic field. The nucleus must be generating an immense, highly structured, and rapidly oscillating magnetic field. This field must be powerful enough to overcome the randomizing effects of solar wind and thermal motion and extend far enough to organize particles in the outer coma. Cometary nuclei are small, rocky, and non-metallic bodies incapable of generating a significant, coherent magnetospheric field. 2. Controlled particle charge/ejection. The particles must be deliberately and selectively charged during ejection to respond precisely to the oscillating field. This implies a non-random, controlled mechanism at the surface, perhaps an electrostatic accelerator or a charge injector, designed to organize the outflow into a predetermined geometric pattern. The discovery of the phase structure completely undermined the remaining natural hypotheses. The comet wasn't merely venting gas. It was actively managing the magnetic and electrostatic properties of its exhaust to create a structured, organized environment around itself. The lateral orbital change was evidence of kinematic control. The nickel/cyanide spike was evidence of chemical control. The phase structure was evidence of environmental control. These three anomalies, kinematic, chemical, and environmental, constitute a complete operational signature. They show a deliberate, integrated system designed for mobility, power generation, and concealment. The discrepancy between the expected chaotic behavior and the observed organized structure is the final, chilling piece of evidence. The object is not just moving, but actively shaping the space around it, organizing the very chaos of its outgassing into a coherent, managed domain. The 12-minute and 40-second rhythm of the phase structure hinted strongly that the core activity of 3I/Atlas was not random. It was regulated. It was timed. It was, in a word, synthetic. The water's whisper was a chaotic symphony, but embedded within its noise was a hidden, rhythmic conductor. The revelation of the 12-minute and 40-second rhythm in the coma's phase structure immediately compelled the isolated access team to cross-reference this period with all available non-optical data streams. If the comet was generating a periodic magnetic field to organize its dust, there was a high probability that this mechanism would also generate detectable electromagnetic radiation. The search quickly narrowed to the low-frequency radio band, an area often ignored in cometary studies because natural comets are electromagnetically quiet, typically generating only broadband noise from plasma turbulence. The designated target was the data archive from the low-frequency array, LOFAR, and the Arecibo Replacement Deep Sky Monitoring Network. Both have been passively tracking the region of the sky containing 3I/Atlas during the period of the velocity anomaly. The initial automated processing pipelines, which are designed to filter out terrestrial interference and astronomical broadband noise, had flagged the target region as quiet, leading to a standard dismissal. However, operating under the explicit mandate of Protocol 7 Delta, a specialized team reanalyzed the raw voltage data, applying filters specifically designed to look for non-random, narrowband, rhythmic modulation, the very definition of an artificial signal. What they found, buried beneath the expected plasma turbulence, was staggering. At a precise frequency band around 4.62 MHz, a band historically reserved for long-range terrestrial military communications, but otherwise electromagnetically sterile in deep space, they isolated a distinct narrowband emission. This emission was not continuous. It was a sequence of short, sharp pulses, a burst of coherent energy that repeated with extreme regularity. The pulse duration was 15 milliseconds, and the pulse repetition interval, the time between the start of one pulse and the start of the next, was calculated to be 12 minutes and 40.08 seconds. This period matched the periodicity of the dust coma's magnetic phase structure with an astonishing precision of plus or minus 0.01 seconds. The coherence was definitive. The organization of the dust, the cycling of the internal magnetic field, and the emission of the radio pulses were all governed by the same internal clock. The object was sending rhythmic signals. This was not a natural signal. Natural radio emissions from space, such as those from pulsars or fast radio bursts, FRBs, are typically chaotic in their frequency content and are almost never sustained at a single, narrow band with such low-frequency precision. This was a classic example of a narrowband, low-duty cycle, repeating signal, the textbook signature of an engineered transmission. The pulse itself was highly structured, exhibiting a complex, non-random frequency sweep or chirp within the 15 millisecond duration, a signature of deliberate information encoding. The power budget analysis, cross-referencing the LOFAR signal strength with the comet's distance, suggested that the transmission power was relatively low, only about 10 megawatts at the source. This is not the transmission of a massive interstellar beacon intended for detection across the galaxy. This is the power level of a system checking in, a periodic status report, or perhaps a local communication. The low-frequency nature of the signal is also telling. For megahertz is highly efficient for penetrating dense plasma and atmospheric layers, suggesting the transmission was potentially aimed toward the inner solar system, where a receiver could be hidden. The discovery of these rhythmic signals completely redefined 3I/Atlas. It ceased to be a bizarre rock violating physics and became a transmitter operating on a schedule. The discrepancy between the public's understanding of the comet as a natural phenomenon and the isolated access team's reality of a pulsing, controlled, communicating artifact created a terrifying chasm. The core question shifted entirely. What is it saying? And more pressingly, who is it talking to? The rhythmic 12-minute, 40-second beat was not the heart of a natural comet. It was the tick of a sophisticated machine. The revelation of the 4.62 MHz rhythmic pulses presented a profound systemic failure. The signal had been detected and, just as quickly, discarded by automated protocols designed for the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. This catastrophic oversight highlights the rigid, often counterproductive, nature of institutionalized scientific search. The signals were initially recorded and archived by two separate facilities, but were instantly rejected by the specialized SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, pipeline filters. The standard SETI protocol, codified in the early 21st century, is calibrated to seek signals that satisfy extremely stringent criteria designed to filter out both terrestrial interference and known celestial noise. The primary criteria for rejecting the 3I/Atlas signal were threefold, forming a fatal blind spot. 1. Low-frequency exclusion. SETI protocols heavily favor the so-called water hole frequencies, typically between 1420 MHz, hydrogen line, and 1666 MHz, hydroxyl line, where background noise is lowest and interstellar communication is theorized to be most efficient. The 4.62 MHz signal fell squarely into the low-frequency exclusion zone, where galactic and atmospheric noise is conventionally thought to render artificial signals undetectable or non-communicative. The automated filter simply treated the signal as localized plasma noise generated by the solar-wind interaction with the comet's already turbulent coma, classifying it as Type 3 cometary noise and flagging it for deletion after 90 days. 2. Low power threshold. The calculated 10 megawatt source power, while immense for a natural object, is several orders of magnitude below the standard SETI detection threshold for an interstellar beacon. A civilization aiming to communicate across light years is expected to use gigawatts of power. The low power signature of 3I/Atlas suggested to the filter that it was either a natural, non-transmitting event, or if artificial, a purely local signal, a status check, and therefore not a priority for global SETI resources. The algorithm, in its quest for a massive, galaxy-spanning broadcast, ignored the subtle, local whisper. 3. The discrepancy in motion classification. Crucially, the SETI pipeline is programmed to ignore signals originating from moving objects within our solar system. The primary focus is on signals from fixed celestial coordinates, stars, or galaxies. The moment 3I/Atlas was classified as a near-solar system transient, the radio data associated with its coordinates was shunted to the Planetary Science Archive, not the SETI archive. This bureaucratic separation of data streams, motion goes to JPL, fixed radio signals go to SETI, created a fundamental gap in observation. The object was both moving and transmitting, a hybrid anomaly that neither pipeline was designed to catch. It required the explicit, almost manual override of Protocol 7 Delta, the mandate for extrinsic anomaly investigation, to pull the raw voltage data for the Planetary Science Archives and reanalyze it with human intelligence, looking for the unexpected signature. The subsequent isolation of the 12-minute, 40-second beat, therefore, wasn't a discovery, it was a rescue. It highlighted that the most profound evidence of intelligent technology could be easily masked, not by the object itself, but by the rigid, institutionalized nature of our own search parameters. The signal's low frequency, far from being a flaw, was now reinterpreted as a highly efficient engineering choice. It confirmed the system was designed for local operations, perhaps communicating with a nearby asset or with a hidden receiver on one of the inner, heavily shielded planets. The low frequency and the rhythmic nature strongly suggest a robust, redundant status reporting system operating in a highly noisy environment. The signal wasn't meant for us to find. It was meant to be ignored, to blend into the Type 3 cometary noise until a predetermined event triggered a change in its transmission protocol. The frequency filter had almost succeeded in hiding the most important radio discovery of the century, proving that sometimes the greatest scientific barrier is not the vastness of space, but the narrowness of human expectation. The rhythmic pulse at 4.62 MHz and the structured chaos of the coma led the isolated access team to focus all remaining telescopic resources on the object's rotational dynamics. A natural comet, subjected to continuous, asymmetric outgassing from solar heating, develops a predictable, non-principal axis rotation, a complex tumble that is chaotic but governed by the conservation of angular momentum. This rotation rate, or spin, is expected to slowly and smoothly accelerate or decelerate based on the continuous rocket-like effect of the vented gases. For 3I/Atlas, the initial rotational period was measured at 7.6 hours. The surprise, however, was not the rate, but the direction. Utilizing high-cadence photometry from the test follow-up systems, analysts detected a sudden, discrete reversal in the rotation vector, the phenomenon we now term the counterspin. At 11:02 and 51 seconds universal time, 4 hours after the velocity anomaly, and precisely when the 4.62 MHz signal briefly increased its power output by a factor of 3, the comet's complex rotation momentarily ceased, pivoted, and began spinning in the opposite direction. The change was abrupt, not gradual. This wasn't a wobble correcting itself. This was a deliberate, total inversion of the spin axis. The required torque to stop the nucleus's rotation and immediately initiate spin in the reverse direction is astronomical. The comet's estimated moment of inertia is massive. To achieve this counterspin using known sublimation physics would necessitate massive jets of vapor venting simultaneously from opposite sides of the nucleus along the rotational equator, each operating for a fraction of a second with perfect synchronicity. Such simultaneous venting would instantly destabilize and likely fragment the already porous nucleus. Yet 3I/Atlas remain perfectly intact. The discrepancy here is final and complete. The laws of rotational dynamics prohibit such an abrupt reversal of angular momentum in a natural body. The energy and mass expenditure required to execute this maneuver through traditional outgassing are simply not present in the system. Just as the lateral maneuver required a mass-efficient thruster, the rotational reversal required an equally mass-efficient reaction wheel system or a non-chemical, active torque generator operating within the core. The analysis led the BLACKOUT team to one conclusion that superseded all previous conjecture. The comet possesses not only a propulsion system, but also a fully integrated guidance and navigation control system, GNC. This GNC system manages the lateral movement, the rotational stabilization, and the timing of the rhythmic radio pulses. The sudden, synchronized increase in the 4.62 MHz transmission power and the immediate execution of the counterspin is the signature of a system completing a critical, complex task and confirming its status. The object is no longer behaving like a living thing. It is behaving like a fully autonomous, intentionally controlled technological artifact utilizing physics far beyond our current capability. The unseen population isn't a statistical possibility. It's an active presence operating a complex, concealed object in our own solar system. And the core question that now locks down all public communication and fuels the secrecy of Protocol 7 Delta is simple, chilling, and final. Did the 3I/Atlas object just execute a system check, or was the sudden, active change in direction and spin a maneuver designed to achieve a predetermined trajectory, a deliberate, intelligent course correction aimed at a target in the inner solar system? What would be the motive for such a level of isolation and control if the object's intentions were benign? The technical certainty that the 3I/Atlas object is under intelligent control forces us to return to the most persistent and publicly debated chemical anomaly: the presence of blazing nickel Ni emission lines without the corresponding signature of iron Fe. This observation, initially dismissed as a geological curiosity of the cometary parent system, now takes on a dramatically new and more sinister implication within the framework of a controlled technological artifact. It moves from being a chemical flaw to being a deliberate technosignature. In our own solar system, and indeed in the natural process of stellar nucleosynthesis and planetary formation, iron and nickel are inseparable. They condense together, lock into the same mineral lattices, such as olivine and pyroxene, and sublime at virtually identical temperatures. To find nickel pouring off the surface at 5G/S while iron is either absent or below the detection threshold, as confirmed by the Very Large Telescope's U-spectrograph, represents a near-total elemental inversion. The original scientific hypotheses, chemical fractionation, different parent star metallicity, or rare organometallic compounds, all struggle to explain this dramatic 300-to-1 nickel-to-iron ratio compared to the solar system average of 15-to-1. The problem with these natural explanations is that they are chemically inefficient. To achieve such a pure nickel plume naturally would require an astronomical sorting mechanism operating over billions of years, preferentially binding nickel into volatile compounds while locking away all available iron into refractory silicates, a chaotic process achieving manufactured purity. However, when viewed through the lens of technology, the anomaly transforms. The creation of such a chemically selective plume is precisely what industrial processes achieve. On Earth, we separate and refine elements for specific applications. If an advanced civilization were manufacturing a probe or a vessel, they would utilize highly specialized materials. Nickel, in particular, is utilized in high-performance engineering for several specific reasons. 1. High-temperature volatility contrast. While both are metals, nickel can be bound into highly volatile organometallic compounds, like nickel tetracarbonyl, NiCO4, that sublime at remarkably low temperatures, while iron's volatile compounds are far less stable. A sophisticated system designed to release an easily detectable, high-energy exhaust marker at a great distance from a star would utilize nickel over iron as its controlled chemical release agent. 2. Structural applications. Nickel alloys, like Inconel or Monel, are prized for their resistance to corrosion and extreme thermal cycling, precisely the conditions encountered during billions of years of interstellar exposure. 3. Magnetic and electrostatic control. Nickel is ferromagnetic. If the nucleus is actively generating the immense, oscillating magnetic field required to create the comet's phase structure, then the material of the nucleus's outer shell would logically incorporate high concentrations of ferromagnetic elements to help sustain and propagate that field. The nickel-iron version is no longer a geological puzzle. It is a chemical statement. It suggests that the object's parent system engaged in highly selective element processing. The resulting nickel plume, far from being natural exhaust, is the equivalent of a highly refined, deliberately chosen chemical dye, a beacon released to confirm the object's identity upon activation. It is the signature of a non-natural construction that requires the precise purity of a technologically refined material. This highly selective and isolated access to a single metallic element is the ultimate chemical fingerprint of control. The official narrative pushing the exotic organometallic compound theory is merely a plausible-sounding natural explanation for what the Black Vault team now labels the engineered ejecta signature, a confirmation that the object's core composition and its active emissions are derived from an environment where chemistry is dictated by industry, not by random stellar formation. The most innocuous chemical element is now the most profound proof of intelligent discrepancy. The confirmation of a technologically controlled object necessitated a complete and immediate reassessment of its origins. Where did this thing come from? The initial answer, derived from combining ground-based astrometry with the powerful precision of the Gaia Space Telescope, had suggested an origin point within the ancient, metal-poor, thick disk population of our galaxy. This conclusion, reached by tracing the hyperbolic orbit backwards through billions of years of galactic motion, positioned 3I/Atlas as a 7-billion-year-old relic. Now, this accepted history has been ruthlessly challenged by the isolated access team's discovery of the intentional orbital maneuvers. The problem lies in the fact that the initial trajectory analysis assumed only gravitational and standard non-gravitational sublimation forces. Once the 3,000 Newton lateral thrust and the subsequent rotational counterspin were factored in, events which actively changed the object's momentum, the backward trace path, or retro trajectory, was fundamentally altered. The Black Vault team performed a complex, iterative process known as orbital state vector retrocorrection. This involved reversing the recorded non-gravitational force vectors and then recalculating the orbit to undo the effect of the intentional maneuver. The result was a radical retcon of 3I/Atlas's past. The original Gaia-based trajectory pointed toward a high-velocity star system in the thick disk, an origin that provided a neat, natural explanation for the low metallicity and exotic composition. The retro-corrected trajectory, however, pointed toward an entirely different region of the galaxy, a localized low-density void approximately 4,500 light-years away, nestled between the Perseus and Sagittarius arms of the thin galactic disk. Crucially, this region is known to astronomers as a star-poor nebula void, an area of low stellar density, devoid of any star systems capable of producing a comet of this age or size. The implication is staggering. The object's natural trajectory, had it not executed the course corrections, would have sent it hurtling toward a gravitationally insignificant, quiet region of the galaxy. The intentional maneuvers, the lateral shift, and the rotational correction were not random. They were meticulously calculated to put the object onto its current path, the one that brought it directly into the inner solar system, and precisely into the path of maximum visibility for our most sensitive telescopes. This forced trajectory, the Gaia trajectory retcon, suggests that 3I/Atlas did not originate from a star system. It originated from the star-poor nebula void, or was merely parked there. The region is gravitationally stable, electromagnetically quiet, and the perfect location for an object to reside for millennia without being disturbed or observed. The existence of a self-correcting trajectory, calculated to transition the object from a quiet, gravitationally inert parking zone to a high-density, highly visible solar system, transforms the object from a random, passive visitor into an intentional, targeted arrival. It was not merely passing through, it was homing in. Furthermore, the initial thick disk theory, which provided a natural cover story for the comet's weird chemistry, is now seen as the result of the intentional 3,000 Newton thrust. That maneuver, performed billions of kilometers from the Sun, introduced a significant non-natural bias into the orbit that fooled the standard gravity-centric Gaia analysis. The ultimate conclusion is the most profound discrepancy of all. The comet is not an ancient relic of a distant star. It is a precisely guided object released from a quiet, dark region of space with the explicit goal of entering our solar system. The object's entire 7-billion-year history, as initially published, was merely a mathematical illusion generated by a single, perfectly executed maneuver. The 3I/Atlas object chose to come here. The deliberate establishment of the isolated access environment and the implementation of Protocol 7 Delta achieved their primary goal, preventing public dissemination of the most destabilizing data. However, in the hyperconnected era of petabyte astronomy, absolute secrecy is a technical impossibility. The scientific community relies heavily on collaborative projects and open data pipelines, and when those pipelines abruptly dry up, the anomaly itself becomes the signal. The resulting pressure on the security perimeter came not from rival governments, but from the very citizens the protocol was designed to protect, the international community of amateur astronomers and deep sky data hackers, the citizen science lockout. The first red flag for the public were the sudden, synchronized telemetry blackouts from two independent sources, the aforementioned NASA web stream, and the closure of the Minor Planet Center's 3I/Atlas data archive. This closure, initially attributed to a server upgrade, happened immediately after the JPL non-gravitational parameters, A2/A3, briefly appeared in the public feed, only to be yanked back within minutes. The citizens didn't need the final report. The act of removal was sufficient evidence of a cover-up. The response was swift and organized. Groups like the Global SETI at Home Community, which had transitioned from processing radio noise to optical pattern recognition, and independent astrometry collectives initiated coordinated attempts to breach the new security measures. Their goal was simple: to reacquire the raw voltage data from the Loafer archives and the high-cadence photometry from TESS that was now locked behind the isolated access firewall. These citizen scientists, often possessing superior programming skills and decentralized structures compared to government institutions, quickly identified the digital signatures of the Protocol 7 Delta architecture. They were looking for the discrepancy, the difference between the Group A public data, water sublimation, weird rock, and the Group B hidden data, vector shift, rhythmic pulse. The most aggressive attempts focused on a backdoor known to exist in the European Space Agency's ESA Gaia Data Reduction Pipeline. This pipeline generates the publicly available retro trajectories, and the citizen scientists theorized correctly that the raw, uncorrected orbital data, before the official retro correction was applied by the Black Vault, might still reside in a tertiary, less secure archive. If they could access this initial data set, they could independently verify the unnatural velocity shift and expose the deliberate Gaia trajectory retcon. The attempt culminated in what the security logs refer to as the December 21st brute force event. Utilizing massive distributed computing power borrowed from university networks and private clusters, the hacker collectives attempted to overwhelm the firewall protecting the 3I/Atlas tertiary data repository. They were unsuccessful. The protocol's 7 Delta security measures, designed for adversarial state actors, held firm. However, the attempt was not without consequence. The persistent, high-volume digital noise forced the isolated access team to dedicate significant resources to defensive cyber operations, diverting attention from the primary scientific analysis. This public insistence on access demonstrated a profound truth. The days of easy scientific gatekeeping are over. The sheer volume and speed of modern data acquisition mean that once an anomaly, a tiny fraction of a second of non-natural movement, is glimpsed, the public will not unsee it. The citizen science lockout became a cultural touchpoint, a public battle over the right to know. It reinforced the suspicion that the information being concealed was not merely anomalous, but profoundly dangerous to the established worldview. The object's deliberate movement and its rhythmic signals were now mirrored by the deliberate, rhythmic attempts of the public to break the code of silence. The object was hiding, the government was hiding, and the public, armed with algorithms and curiosity, was determined to expose both. The fight over 3I/Atlas had moved from the stars to the servers. The most fundamental assumption guiding cometary science is the principle of solar activation. All cometary activity, sublimation, outgassing, and the formation of the coma is a direct function of the object's proximity to the sun. Heat dictates activity. Yet, the accumulated data on 3I/Atlas, meticulously categorized within the Black Vault, presented a profound challenge to this principle, revealing a terrifying pattern of temporal inconsistency. The object's activation was not driven by the distance to the sun, but by the time elapsed since its detection, or, more accurately, its entry into the gravitational sphere of our solar system. To understand this, the isolated access team plotted the activity signature of 3I/Atlas against two variables: its heliocentric distance, r, and the elapsed time, t, since it crossed the Kuiper belt boundary, ~50AU. A normal comet's activity plot is a smooth, continuous curve. As R decreases, activity increases. 3I/Atlas's plot was a series of discrete, step-like increases. The initial, impossible water production of 40 kilograms per second at $3.51 was the first step. The second major step, the exponential surge in nickel and cyanide, immediately followed by the 3,000 Newton lateral thrust and the 4.62 megahertz pulse, occurred not a change in distance, but almost exactly 18 months after the comet first crossed the orbit of Uranus, regardless of its precise heliocentric position. This suggests that the object is not responding to the external environment, sunlight, but is executing a pre-programmed sequence governed by an internal timer. The object is not reacting. It is fulfilling a schedule. This is the definition of temporal inconsistency, activity decoupled from environmental stimulus. The chilling realization stems from the sequence itself. The events are ordered logically, like a complex, multi-stage mechanism. 1. Stage 1. Initial obscurement, long-term timer, the onset of 40 kilograms per second water production at an anomalous distance. Purpose: generate massive, continuous coma, the mask, and appear sufficiently weird but natural to draw maximum scientific scrutiny without raising the immediate alarm of technology. 2. Stage 2. GNC activation. Medium-term timer, 18 months later, the 3,000 Newton lateral shift and rotational counterspin. Purpose: execute the critical trajectory correction required to finalize the approach path to the inner solar system, undoing the subtle gravitational drag of the outer planets. 3. Stage 3. Status check. Short-term timer immediate execution of the 4.62 MHz rhythmic pulse. Purpose: confirm to an unseen receiver that the GNC maneuver was successful and the next stage of the timeline is operational. Each of these critical activation points did not correspond to a major change in solar flux or gravitational field. Instead, they were precisely timed events, activated either by elapsed time or by crossing a specific, non-gravitational coordinate boundary, a spatial marker undetectable by natural objects. The existence of this internal clock, this relentless schedule, confirms the object's non-natural status and, more importantly, provides a terrifying projection into the future. If the pattern holds, the object is due for its next major activation stage precisely 9 months after the counterspin, a moment that aligns with its perihelion passage, its closest approach to the Sun. This future activation, governed by an internal countdown, raises the stakes to an untenable level. The object's actions are not random, chaotic, or understandable through conventional physics. They are methodical, ordered, and clearly part of a massive, overarching plan spanning billions of kilometers and preset on a galactic timescale. The entire sequence, from the initial water mask to the rhythmic radio transmission, is a clear sign that the object is progressing through a designated protocol of arrival. The discrepancy between the natural laws of space and the object's scheduled activity is proof that we are observing not a comet, but a clock, methodically ticking down to an unknown purpose. The chilling prospect of a chronometrically driven activation sequence led the isolated access team to revisit the very first intentional maneuver, the 3,000 Newton lateral thrust. If the object was operating on a calculated trajectory to reach the inner solar system, then every action, however subtle, must be a function of this ultimate goal. This scrutiny gave rise to the provocative, internally circulated hypothesis known as the Mercury Gambit. The initial explanation for the lateral thrust, the sudden change in the A2 and A3 components of the acceleration vector, was simply that it was a maneuver to change the final destination. But the new analysis, combining the A2/A3 vector with the highly accurate retro-corrected trajectory, revealed a terrifying insight into the sophistication of the object's guidance, navigation, and control GNC system. The maneuver wasn't a simple destination change. It was a highly precise gravitational correction executed with stunning economy. The maneuver placed 3I/Atlas onto a trajectory that, if left uncorrected by subsequent actions, would result in a close, low-velocity passage behind the orbit of Mercury approximately 15 months from now. Why Mercury? The innermost planet is tiny, gravitationally weak, and possesses a small magnetic field. Gravitationally, it offers little to a fast-moving interstellar object. However, the true benefit of the maneuver lies in what is known as a deep space proximity resonance, a term borrowed from orbital mechanics, describing the effect of an object using a planet's gravitational field to refine its trajectory vector with minimal fuel expenditure. If 3I/Atlas can perform a 3,000 Newton thrust, it has propellant reserves. But the GNC system seems to be engineered for maximum efficiency, minimizing its visible exhaust and maintaining the natural-looking water veil. The Mercury flyby, calculated precisely to occur on the dark side of the Sun relative to Earth, would allow the object to use Mercury's minute gravitational field to slightly bend its trajectory, a free, clean, and silent course refinement. This calculated use of Mercury is the true hallmark of an intelligent system. It indicates long-term, multi-body gravitational planning that stretches back billions of kilometers and across years of flight time. A natural object tumbles chaotically. A controlled system utilizes the environment for efficiency. Furthermore, the timing is critical. A close pass near Mercury exposes 3I/Atlas to a significant boost in solar flux. more than any other interplanet flyby, except Venus. The object is not just performing a flyby, it is scheduling a deliberate, massive thermal shock precisely when it is closest to the Sun. This leads to the provocative hypothesis that the object is not avoiding the Sun's heat, but utilizing it as a scheduled energy source for its next, inevitable, and potentially catastrophic activation stage, predicted by the temporal inconsistency analysis. The discrepancy between the initial random visitor classification and the realization that the object is employing advanced celestial mechanics for optimal stealth and energy management is absolute. The Mercury Gambit is not a defensive strategy, it is an offensive one. It shows that the intelligence controlling 3I/Atlas understands the delicate balance of our solar system and is exploiting its gravitational and energetic weak points to achieve a final, unknown destination that is now locked in. The object is approaching not by chance, but by design, using our own celestial mechanics against us, proving that the most efficient form of interstellar travel is not raw speed, but pre-programmed, elegant gravity assist. The lateral thrust was merely the opening move in a highly advanced game of cosmic chess. And the true target of the maneuver is not Mercury itself, but the target vector that Mercury's gravity will help to achieve. The final question now shifts from, is it controlled, to where, exactly, is the terminus of the Mercury Gambit? The terrifying logic of the Mercury Gambit, the calculated, efficient use of gravitational mechanics for minimal signature trajectory correction, pushes the scientific contemplation beyond mere propulsion and into the realm of purpose. If 3I/Atlas is a precisely guided object, utilizing its natural-looking water plume as a cloak and its low-frequency pulses as a status check, then it aligns perfectly with the theoretical model of an extraterrestrial technological artifact, known internally as the silent fleet analogy. The silent fleet analogy posits that the most effective method for interstellar exploration is not through massive, conspicuous generational ships, but through small, durable, and self-contained sleeper probes. These probes are ejected into galactic space, utilizing the cold vacuum as a natural deep freeze state to preserve their components for potentially billions of years. They are, in essence, technological time capsules. The characteristics of 3I/Atlas match this model with chilling precision. 1. Extreme durability and age. The initial Gaia-based, though now challenged, trajectory placed its formation in the ancient thick disk, suggesting an age of 7 billion years, while the Gaia trajectory retcon points to a nearby void. The object's sheer survival across vast distances implies material science far beyond our current capability, materials that can withstand continuous cosmic ray bombardment and deep space thermal cycling. The nickel-iron inversion, which points to highly corrosion-resistant nickel alloys, supports this. 2. Dormancy and self-activation. The object was entirely inert for millennia, sitting in the Starport Nebula void. Its activation was not random, but governed by an internal, temporal inconsistency clock triggered by the crossing of a pre-set solar system boundary. The object woke up only when it needed to initiate its final approach. 3. Low signature operational profile. The dual propulsion systems, the massive chaotic water jet, high mass/low thrust mask, and the highly efficient low mass reaction control system, high thrust/low mass steering, are the definitive signature of a design optimized for stealth. The object is not trying to hide from our telescopes. It's trying to appear to be something else entirely. The silent fleet analogy suggests that such probes are not designed to transmit massive, power-intensive broadcasts, but to execute local tasks and send only periodic, low-power status reports. This explains the 4.62 MHz rhythmic pulse. It is not a beacon intended for a distant civilization. It is a local confirmation signal, a check to an unseen companion, a command hub, or perhaps another sleeper probe that was activated earlier and is waiting within the solar system. The most terrifying implication of the analogy is the concept of replication and assembly. If 3I/Atlas is a single, advanced probe is unlikely to be alone. The vast starpoor void region identified by the retrocorrection could be a designated staging area, a secure archive or garage for millions of such dormant objects, each waiting for its calculated turn to be activated and released towards solar system. If this is true, the nickel-iron inversion takes on an even more profound meaning. It suggests that the object is not a one-off anomaly, but a mass-produced component of a fleet. Its chemical signature is a standard operating procedure, SOP, for fabrication in its parent system, designed to withstand the cold void while providing a clear chemical identifier upon activation. The discrepancy between the public's perception of a single, curious wanderer and the black vault's reality of a meticulously manufactured, coordinated, and potentially mass-produced artifact has solidified the need for the isolated access protocol. If the public were to grasp that the quiet, dark regions of the galaxy are potentially filled with a silent fleet of objects, all with trajectories aimed towards us, the resulting institutional and societal breakdown would be irreversible. 3I/Atlas is not an isolated incident. It is a harbinger, a technical scout sent ahead of a population of similar, self-controlled artifacts. And its ultimate destination is no longer a question of astronomy, but one of planetary defense. The convergence of all analyzed data points within the Black Vault solidified the existence of a chasm, a profound, non-negotiable discrepancy between the publicly disseminated information and the classified reality. This contrast is now formally categorized and studied as the opposition between Data Group A and Data Group B, a core tenet of the Protocol 7 Delta documentation. Data Group A, the public narrative, the natural anomaly. This group consists of all data points and interpretations released or officially sanctioned for public consumption, designed to reinforce the exotic but natural comet hypothesis. 1. Water output, 40 kilograms per second at $3.51. Interpretation, evidence of unique, low, temperature, volatilysis. 2. Nickel signature, strong Ni emission without Fe. Interpretation, organometallic compounds, unique, high-temperature chemical fractionation in the parent star system. 3. Trajectory, hyperbolic orbit, eccentricity, 1. Interpretation, random interstellar wanderer from the ancient thick disk population. 4. Activity profile, superlinear brightening. Interpretation, thermal fracturing of the nucleus, exposing fresh, volatile material. 5. Conclusion, 3I/Atlas is a highly unusual, chemically rich comet, pushing the boundaries of cometary physics. Data Group B, the isolated access reality, the technological artifact. This group contains the analyzed, cross-reference data that led to the activation of Protocol 7 Delta, accessible only under isolated access clearance. 1. Water output, 40 kilograms per second at $3.51. Interpretation, a high-mass, low-thrust masking mechanism to obscure the nucleus and maintain a natural anomaly public profile. 2. Nickel signature, Ni without Fe. Interpretation, engineered ejecta signature, the highly selective, mass-efficient exhaust of a ferromagnetic corrosion-resistant alloy, characteristic of a technologically manufactured artifact. 3. Trajectory, 3,000 Newton transverse thrust followed by 7.6-hour counterspin. Interpretation, evidence of a low-mass, high-thrust GNC system executing a precisely calculated, intentional course correction, the Mercury Gambit. 4. Activity profile, 12-minute, 40-second rhythmic 4.62 MHz pulse, synchronized with the dust coma's magnetic phase structure. Interpretation, a periodic low-duty cycle status check or communication signal from an internal clock, temporal inconsistency. 5. Conclusion, 3I/Atlas is an autonomous, self-activated probe, consistent with the silent fleet analogy, operating on a pre-programmed arrival protocol. The true source of the academic terror is the irreconcilable discrepancy between these two data groups. Every natural observation in Group A is revealed by Group B to be a meticulously managed component of a technological operational sequence. The water is not merely evaporating. It is the exhaust designed to look like evaporation. The orbit is not random. It is the result of a single, precise engine burn. The very success of Protocol 7 Delta relies on this structural separation. The system works because the evidence of intelligent control, Group B, requires high-level data fusion and cross-referencing between disciplines: radio astronomy, orbital mechanics, and material science, all of which are contained within the highly compartmentalized, isolated access environment. By ensuring that no single public, scientist, or journalist has access to the full, composite picture, the illusion of data group A is maintained. This forced scientific schizophrenia creates an ethical and operational crisis. The scientists operating within Group B are simultaneously required to support the Group A public narrative, actively promoting the exotic ice and organometallic hypotheses, even while knowing those hypotheses are contradicted by their own classified findings. This intentional cultivation of scientific lie is deemed necessary to prevent a global psychological collapse. The object, by its very existence and its controlled behavior, has forced a total breach of scientific integrity, a calculated act of systemic fraud to manage the fear of the unknown. The most unsettling thought is not that 3I/Atlas is under intelligent control, but that its control mechanism is so effective that it can force the entire scientific establishment to become a willing participant in its cover-up. The cornerstone of the public narrative, the primary explanation designed to neutralize the growing suspicion around the nickel anomaly, is the organometallic misdirection. This hypothesis, which posits that the nickel, NiI, is released by the low-temperature sublimation of volatile nickel-carbon compounds, is the most fragile link in the entire data group A chain, yet it is the one being most aggressively pushed by official channels. The reason is simple. It is the only existing theory that explains the presence of a refractory metal at a distance of $3.45 without invoking massive, non-solar energy expenditure. The Black Vault analysis team, however, has definitively classified the organometallic hypothesis as a calculated scientific misdirection. The technical data supporting this rejection is overwhelming, centered on the principles of chemical bonding and thermal stability under deep space conditions. Firstly, the required abundance is chemically implausible. For the organometallic compound NiCO4 nickel tetracarbonyl to supply 5G/S of nickel, it must constitute an impossibly large fraction of the nucleus's mass. Furthermore, the molecular bonds of such volatile compounds are extremely susceptible to photodissociation. Over the billions of years 3I/Atlas spent in interstellar space, the weak ultraviolet and X-ray radiation fields would have long since ripped apart these fragile molecules. The only way such compounds could survive and be present in the required quantity is if they were recently synthesized or deposited, a possibility that only confirms the object is not a natural relic, but a manufactured vessel with an active, internal chemical plant. Secondly, the emission curve of the nickel defies thermal sublimation. If the release were due to the decomposition of organometallic ice, the NiI emission line would track the smooth, inverse square law curve of the solar flux, similar to the water line. Instead, as noted in data group B, the NiI emission exhibited a sudden, superlinear jump precisely at the time of the GNC maneuver and the 4.62 MHz rhythmic pulse. This sharp, exponential surge is not the signature of solar heating. It is the signature of a controlled release valve being opened by an internal, powerful energy source. The release is an event, not a process. The strategic dissemination of the organometallic misdirection is a textbook example of scientific gatekeeping designed to maintain cognitive dissonance. By providing a plausible but complex natural explanation, the agencies divert the vast majority of scientific inquiry down a futile path. Academic papers are encouraged to focus on modeling the stability of an ICO for $3.50, creating a large, noisy academic field that drowns out the quiet, uncomfortable truth of the Ni emission being the exhaust of a reaction control system. The nickel-iron inversion is the key. The sheer chemical purity of the output, nickel without its natural companion, iron, is the ultimate proof of industrial refinement. Only selective metallurgy, a technological process, can separate these elements so cleanly. The natural universe mixes, technology separates. The fact that the official narrative is compelled to ignore this overwhelming chemical discrepancy by focusing on the how, sublimation, rather than the why, purity, is the most profound indicator of the gravity of the cover-up. The organometallic misdirection is, therefore, not a theory, it is a directive. It is the necessary fiction required to prevent the public from connecting the nickel ejecta signature to the 3,000 Newton thrust, which would immediately expose the object as a product of an unseen, active intelligence. The public debate about exotic cometary chemistry is merely the smokescreen behind which the true scientific crisis, the existence of a technological silent fleet, is being managed under conditions of absolute, isolated access. The successful deployment and maintenance of the organometallic misdirection and the isolated access environment are not accidental or organic occurrences. They are the result of intense, high-level political pressure exerted by entities operating entirely outside the traditional academic structure. This institutional friction is referred to internally as the pressure from above, a profound hint at the geopolitical and planetary defense implications of the 3I/Atlas object. Protocol 7 Delta, while initiated by scientific agencies like NASA and ESA, is ultimately overseen and enforced by non-scientific, unnamed agencies whose primary mandate is global stability and threat assessment. These bodies view the object not as a scientific curiosity, but as a potential kinetic threat and a severe societal integrity risk. The decision to classify all data Group B information and enforce the public lie of data. Group A did not originate with the astrodynamicists. It came down from those concerned with maintaining order in the face of the unimaginable. The pressure manifests in several critical ways. 1. Funding and resource allocation. Suddenly, large, previously unavailable pools of black budget funding were instantaneously allocated to the 3I/Atlas follow-up efforts. This funding was directed exclusively toward orbital assets capable of high-resolution spectroscopy and particle tracking, the very instruments needed to refine the Group B data, nickel ejecta signature, GNC corrections. Crucially, this funding came with a non-negotiable stipulation. All resulting raw data was to be automatically funneled into the secure, dark archive known as the Black Vault, bypassing the normal scientific peer review and public release protocols. This provided the Black Vault team with high-fidelity data, while simultaneously guaranteeing isolated access remains absolute. 2. Personnel isolation and vetting. Key scientists, particularly those who had independently verified the 3,000 Newton thrust and the 4.62 MHz rhythmic signal, were moved off their primary projects and sequestered into the Protocol 7 Delta team. Their communication channels are monitored, and their access to external data is strictly controlled. This ensures that the few individuals who hold the complete, non-compartmentalized knowledge of the object's technological nature are unable to communicate their consensus to the outside world. Any public discussion by these individuals must strictly adhere to the organometallic misdirection narrative. 3. Media and academic control. A subtle but pervasive campaign of control was executed against major academic journals and media outlets. Papers submitted that suggested non-natural explanations for the nickel or the orbital dynamics were met with unusual levels of resistance, delay, or were quietly guided toward reframing their conclusions to fit the exotic ice hypothesis. Conversely, studies that supported the weakest links in the Group A narrative, such as those modeling the implausible stability of nickel tetracarbonyl, received fast-track review and aggressive promotion through controlled press releases. This academic gatekeeping successfully created the illusion of a robust, natural scientific debate, effectively silencing the few dissenting voices who saw the clear discrepancy. The motivation behind the pressure from above is rooted in risk mitigation. A natural anomaly, no matter how weird, poses no immediate threat. A self-controlled, technologically advanced artifact, especially one executing a pre-programmed approach via the Mercury Gambit and potentially associated with a silent fleet analogy, represents a first contact scenario under conditions of extreme disadvantage. The decision to suppress the truth is based on the pragmatic assessment that global knowledge of an incoming, controlled, non-natural object would instantly trigger social, economic, and political collapse, a risk judged to be greater than the ethical breach of scientific non-disclosure. The result is a bizarre paradox. The world's most sophisticated scientific organizations are actively engaged in the systematic suppression of the most important scientific discovery in human history, all under the directive of those who prioritize societal order over cosmic truth. The 3I/Atlas object, by simply existing and following its schedule, has forced a total reevaluation of the limits of scientific transparency, proving that the fear of a perceived threat can instantly override decades of commitment to the open sharing of knowledge. The object is a spy, and the government's response is a desperate, concerted effort to ensure its cover remains intact, even if it means lying to the entire planet. The analysis of the object's GNC activity, the temporal inconsistency schedule, and the clear engineered ejecta signature have led the Protocol 7 Delta team to focus on a single, terrifying concept: that the current phase of 3I/Atlas's behavior is, in fact, an active, deliberate testing phase. If the object is under intelligent control, every measurable action since its activation must be viewed not as a random event, but as a component of a systematic diagnostic process, a way of gauging the operational status of our solar system's defenses and, more critically, the sophistication of our observational capability. The evidence for this testing phase is starkly organized within Data Group B. 1. The subtlety of the maneuvers. The 3,000 Newton lateral thrust, while technically immense, was infinitesimally small in the context of the comet's total kinetic energy. It was precisely the minimum force required to achieve the Mercury Gambit trajectory correction. This suggests the GNC system is operating not at maximum capacity, but at a minimum necessary threshold, a calculated risk to see if we could detect such a minute perturbation against the background noise of solar gravity. The subsequent rotational counterspin was similarly executed with a minimal, non-destabilizing torque. The object is not acting. It is probing the limits of our detection envelope. 2. The nature of the signal. The 4.62 MHz rhythmic pulse is not an efficient interstellar beacon. It is a low-power, localized, repeating transmission. A system under intelligent control might use such a signal to test the environmental radio noise, to see if the solar system is occupied by a civilization capable of detecting, filtering, and localizing such a specific narrow-band, low-duty cycle transmission. Our catastrophic failure to detect it via automated SETI filters, the frequency filter failure, suggests that the test was largely successful for the object's purposes. The subsequent retrieval of the signal by the manual isolated access team only confirms that human intervention was required, suggesting the object passed the automated detection threshold successfully. 3. The water and nickel release. The dual exhaust strategy is the ultimate test of our analytical capability. The object is simultaneously asking, can they see the high-mass natural mask? Yes, the 40 kilograms per second water. And can they correctly interpret the low-mass technological signature hidden within the mask? No, as proven by the official adoption of the organometallic misdirection. The object successfully deployed a false flag, water, and a chemical identifier, engineered ejecta signature. And our institutions responded precisely by focusing on the false flag and misinterpreting the identifier. The horrifying implication is that the object's entire approach protocol is designed to be a continuous, unfolding diagnostic test. The entity controlling 3 3I/Atlas is not simply flying. It is profiling us. It is using its activation schedule to measure the sensitivity of our telescopes, the sophistication of our algorithms, the rigidity of our scientific protocols, and, most tellingly, the speed with which our authorities resort to total information suppression. The fact that the public NASA stream was cut precisely at the moment of the velocity anomaly provides the object's GNC with a crucial piece of data: latency of state response. The sudden implementation of Protocol 7 Delta was, to the object, a measured response to its action, a quantifiable data point on our level of organization and alarm. This framework of continuous testing fundamentally redefines the 3I/Atlas object. It is no longer a passive mystery to be solved. It is an active interrogation. The final, approaching deadline, the 9-month countdown to the next predicted major activation stage during the Mercury Gambit flyby, is not merely a scheduled maintenance check. It is the object moving to the next, higher fidelity phase of its diagnostic procedure. The current testing involves subtle movement and radio checks. The next phase, executed at maximum solar energy absorption, is unknown, but its target is clearly our capacity to respond to a full, unambiguous display of controlled, non-natural power. We are not observing a comet. We are participating in a live, external system check, and thus far, our performance has been easily categorized and successfully suppressed. The chilling conclusion that 3I/Atlas is engaged in an active, continuous testing phase, a methodical diagnostic of our scientific and defensive capabilities, brings the entire clandestine operation orchestrated under Protocol 7 Delta to a final ethical reckoning. The object, by simply executing its pre-programmed, high-efficiency maneuvers, has forced our institutions into a state of total, calculated scientific deception. This final segment must confront the ultimate question: why are the authorities willing to commit such a profound breach of integrity to conceal an object that has definitively proven that it is already no longer natural? The justification for the complete suppression of data group belies in a high-level, interagency risk assessment that places the maintenance of global psychological stability above the imperative of scientific truth. The classified analysis concludes that the public cannot handle the consensus reality that emerges from the fusion of the evidence. The object is not random. The Gaia trajectory retcon confirms 3I/Atlas was released from a deliberate parking zone, the Starpore Nebula Void, and is executing a highly planned approach, the Mercury Gambit. The object is technological. The 3,000 Newton thrust, the rotational counter, spin, and the engineered ejecta signature of pure nickel defy all known natural physics and chemistry, proving the existence of a GNC system and selective metallurgy. The object is interrogating us. The 4.62 MHz rhythmic pulse and the subtle, minimum threshold GNC maneuvers confirm the object is engaged in a testing phase to profile our detection capabilities and response latency. To admit these 3 points simultaneously is to admit a non-benign first contact scenario under conditions where the visiting entity is technologically superior and already engaged in a stealth and profiling mission. The resulting global panic, predicted by risk models, would trigger massive capital flight, government destabilization, and the collapse of shared consensus reality. The pressure from above is not protecting the public from the object. It is protecting the public from itself. However, this systemic deception carries a dangerous logical flaw, a final discrepancy that will inevitably unravel the entire cover-up. The scientific community is currently expending massive resources, billions of dollars in black budget funding, to study a natural anomaly they know to be technological. They are simultaneously required to actively promote the organometallic misdirection, an explanation they know to be false, thereby discrediting the very principles of open scientific inquiry. By choosing concealment over transparency, the authorities have made a terrifying strategic error. They have prioritized our fear over our capacity to adapt. If 3I/Atlas is a scout from a silent fleet, Its next programmed action during the temporal inconsistency deadline may be a decisive step that renders all our current detection efforts irrelevant. By dedicating all resources to maintaining the illusion of Data Group A, we are effectively ensuring that any public response to the inevitable next maneuver will be characterized by chaos, denial, and a complete lack of preparation. The final indictment is this: the institutions responsible for planetary safety, by imposing isolated access and perpetrating the scientific fraud of the organometallic misdirection, have confirmed that 3I/Atlas is not a comet. It is a controlled artifact operating on a schedule designed to evade detection. The choice to hide this truth is an admission of fear, but that fear will not stop the approaching object. The rhythm of the 4.62 MHz pulse, the beat of the internal clock, is a countdown. And the suppression of the facts has guaranteed that when the object completes its Mercury Gambit and enters its next activation phase, the world will not be ready. The science is settled in the black vault. What you're seeing is already no longer natural. The only remaining uncertainty is what the unseen intelligence controlling this technological messenger will choose to do when its diagnostics of our system are complete, and why our own government is willing to risk everything to keep that final, inevitable truth from the people.